This is my pink Strat, and in today's video I'm going to be refinishing it. If you're at all familiar with my channel, you'll have probably already seen this guitar before. It was the subject of what is currently the most popular video on my channel. This guitar was a parts carter that I built about 2 or 3 years ago. I love this guitar, it plays great and it sounds great. Over the last few years I've just got slightly over the colour, and so today I'm going to be refinishing this guitar for the 3rd time. I bought some new parts, I've got a different pickguard, I've got a new pickup for the bridge, and I've got the nitro to do the refinishing in the body. Let's go. So this is the full refinishing process. Obviously, to repaint the guitar I had to completely disassemble it, so that includes taking the strings off, taking the neck off, and then unsoldering all the electronics and getting the pickguard off so the body is just on its own, and then I can strip the paint and refinish it. There's a few different ways I could have gone about getting the nitro off the guitar. One way would have just been sanding, but that would have taken a lot of sandpaper and quite a lot of time, so I decided to use nitro mods, which is a paint stripper. The process is essentially to apply this quite liberally across the whole guitar and dab it on with a sponge or a paintbrush, then leave it to sit for a little bit and the nitro mod does its work and the paint will blister and start to come off. It makes the paint liquidy again and really gooey, and then you can just go in and scrape it off. I repeated this process twice to get as much off as I could, and then once it was fairly clean I sanded to get it back down to the bare wood. I started off with 200 grit sandpaper, which is pretty coarse, and that just made quite light work of getting the rest of the paint off and getting the wood really nice and smooth again. This is how the body's looking after that initial round of sanding. It's still quite rough because 200 grit sandpaper is very coarse, but then I went in and started sanding with some higher grits to prepare it for the painting. At this point I also taped off all the parts of the body that I didn't want to get paint on. This includes the neck pocket because I don't want to change the neck fit at all by adding extra layers of paint. And then the inside of the control cavity and the hole for the input jack, just because there's no benefit to finishing those. And then it's ready for painting. I made a very DIY version of a guitar neck just out of a plank of wood that I found in the bins of my flat, and screwed that into the body so that I had something to hold it up while it was drying and something to hold onto while I was painting as well. I've got 3 different types of nitro that I'm going to be using in various coats. The first one is a sanding sealer and primer, which I did 2 coats of. Then I've got the colour nitro, which is the Tahiti Coral. And then the third one is a clear gloss, which is going to go over the top and get that really nice glossy finish. After the coats of the sanding sealer, I just used some 600 grit sandpaper just to sand a couple of areas where there was some paint splatter or an area that looked a little bit rough. Sanding between coats helps to get a really good final product. Once I was happy with the base layers of primer, I started doing the colour, and then it was pretty smooth sailing from there. And this is the final result after all of the layers of gloss as well. As you can see, it looks pretty shiny, but there's definitely that orange peely texture on the body where the paint has dried. So now it's time to wet sand the guitar to get the finish a lot smoother. I took off the hanger that I'd made that was drilled into the neck while it was drying, pulled off all the tape, and then started wet sanding. As you can see, although it looks pretty smooth, this is the orange peel texture that I was talking about up close. The process of wet sanding will level all of this out so it's a much more glossy mirrored finish. I started off with some 600 grit sandpaper on the bottom of a sponge, so it was applying the pressure evenly across the whole area that I was sanding, and then I just worked my way up there through the different grits of sandpaper. This is what the finish looks like after sanding. As you can see, there's a slight sheen to it, but it actually still looks quite matte and definitely doesn't look like a glossy guitar finish yet. And this is where the very labour-intensive process of buffing the guitar comes in. I've refinished several guitars before, and usually I do it by hand, but this time I bought an attachment for my drill, which is a few different types of buffing wheels. I also bought some polishing compound, and then started to use the different grits of the buffing wheel to polish the guitar up to a nicer finish. This is what the finish looked like even just after the first grit of the buffing wheel. It's already becoming a lot shinier, and has more of that glossy finish that I was after. I slowly worked my way through the rest of the different grits, and after a couple of hours of doing this and some very achy arms, this is the result. You can see here how shiny it's become. And now it's time to put the guitar back together. Like I mentioned earlier, as well as repainting the guitar, I bought some extra parts that I wanted to replace. So I've got a new pickup for the bridge, I'm replacing the humbucker with another single coil so it's a more traditional Strat layout. And I've also got a new pickguard because obviously it has to facilitate the different shaped pickup. I rubbed some steel wool all over the new plastic parts, which just helps to make them look a little bit less brand new. It takes that top level of shininess off and dulls them up slightly, which makes them look a bit older. As well as the steel wool, I also dabbed some black and brown shoe polish on the plastic parts. It simulates how old pickguards can get a little bit grubby from all the dirt on your hands, but this is a much more hygienic way of doing that. And then it was time to reassemble. I moved over all the electronics from the old pickguard into the new one, and then took out the old pickup and soldered in the new one into the wiring loom so it was ready to go. Once that was done, I could start putting the pickguard assembly back into the body and connecting up all the wires to the input jack and the trem claw. Before putting all the screws back in, I did a quick test just to make sure the pickups are working as expected. You can do this by plugging the guitar in and then using the pickup selector to go through all the pickup configurations and tapping the pole pieces with something metal. If it makes a noise, you know it's working. And then I was happy to put the guitar back together. Then I could put the rest of the hardware on, like putting the screws back in the pickguard, putting the bridge back in, and putting the springs on the tremolo system. As soon as the neck was on, it just felt like it all came together. Then just to give it some last minute love, I put some lemon oil on the rosewood fingerboard, and then put a new set of strings on, and we're ready to go. Okay, it's all done, and this is the very attractive final result. I'm really happy with how it turned out. The finish is a lot better than I was expecting. There's a few dents and things on the body where I've knocked it against the desk and stuff as I've had it for the last few years. And even though I'm not relicking the finish this time, I didn't bother using any wood filler or anything to fill those in because they're part of the character of the guitar. I'm really happy with the colour. I didn't know that it was going to look this cool in person. It looked great on the photos online, but in person it's a bit more of like a pinky orange. Using the buffing tool on the drill made all the difference, I think, so I don't know if you can see this, I'll get some close-ups. But the body is super shiny. It's a proper gloss finish now. If I compare that to my other guitars, so for example, this is my bass guitar, and I refinished this one as well in nitro, but this was just polished by hand, and I say polished in inverted commas because it wasn't really polished, but you can probably see immediately this one's fairly matte with just a little bit of a sheen to it, whereas this one is like a proper mirror finish. And then obviously I also replaced the pickguard, so this is now a cream pickguard instead of a mint green one. As you saw, I rubbed the steel wool on it slightly just to get rid of the perfectly brand new plastic look to it. And I also obviously replaced the humbucker and the bridge with the single coil. So now it's back to a traditional Strat configuration. It looks really cool. I'm really happy with how it looks. It's very vintage vibey. Let's see how it sounds. So there we go, that's what it sounds like. I'm already really enjoying having a single coil back in the bridge. It's going to be great for all the John Mayer, Hendrix, SRV kind of stuff that I play. And apart from that, aesthetically, I just feel really inspired to play this guitar more again. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed. If you'd like to see the original video of me building this guitar, it's available in the popular upload section on my channel, along with the various other guitar builds that I've done. Consider liking, subscribing, and I'll see you in the next one.